I'm joined now by Future Cities Project Director Austin Williams and Sakina Sheikh, who's a climate justice campaigner with the activist group Platform. Welcome to both of you. Sakina Sheikh, if I can start with you. Do you share the concerns of Extinction Rebellion, and are they going the right way about getting their message across, do you think?
I think we should all share the concerns of Extinction Rebellion. We all inhabit this earth, and climate change is the biggest existential crisis we face as humanity. From the Amazon fires that we saw burning recently to the Yorkshire Moor fires here in the UK, there's no doubt that we are so close to doing irreparable damage to our earth. So I think Extinction Rebellion are being uncompromising in their messaging, saying that climate change needs to be at the top of the agenda, and that's the only way frontline communities in the global south can survive, and it's also how countries like in the global north, like the UK, can survive. So absolutely we need to be listening to them, and absolutely we need to be listening to the decades of climate justice campaigners who've been saying the same thing, and our government needs to take serious action, which includes stop subsidising fossil fuel industries.
OK, and let me put that to Austin Williams then. The biggest existential challenge we face, says Sakina Sheikh there, is this kind of action, the more radical, non-violent action that Extinction Rebellion is carrying out, needed for the government to sit up and listen, do you think?
Sorry, so am I supposed to now accept the fact that this is the biggest, most existential crisis that we face? It sounds a bit like Donald Trump's last quotation that you read out in the earlier item on a great and unmatched wisdom, as if I'm not supposed to challenge it. I mean, fair enough. For some people it might be. For me, it's not. I mean, there are bigger things I think to worry about. But I do think that it's a very interesting situation that's happening at the moment, where you have protesters who are putting this on the agenda, and everybody is falling into line. I don't think that there is any such thing as the science is over or the debate is over situation, but at the moment it seems that everybody else has given up. So we have a weird moment where, in my youth, I used to remember little old men wandering around the streets with sandwich boards saying the end is nigh on it, and now we have everybody seems to have joined in the end of collective sanity is nigh, where nobody seems to have got a handle on the fact that you've got a bunch of committed, albeit committed, people bringing many cities to a standstill. This is absurd.
Sakina Sheikh, do you want to come back on that?
I mean, I think perhaps if you're sitting in your ivory towers in the centre of London, in the city, you wouldn't think it's the most important issue. But a third of Bangladesh is underwater. Islands have disappeared, and Kenyan farmers are displaced in Africa. One Indigenous woman is killed on average per month because of the excesses of the fossil fuel industry. This is extremely urgent. And just because we're not feeling the full force of it here in the global north doesn't mean global south communities haven't been on the front line and dying because of climate change, predominantly because of a disproportionate carbon footprint in places like the UK, and London has the capacity to respond with responsibility. And I think I'm incredibly proud of every single person who's on the street today, standing in solidarity with communities in the global south, but communities here in the UK, right? Environmental racism shows us that air pollution and climate change affects working class communities and communities of colour the most. So we absolutely need to act immediately, and this government is dragging their feet, and that's why we are bringing the city to a standstill, so that we can hold this government to account and actually see them take proper action.
And Austin Williams,
you can blame every single thing. You can blame every single thing, apparently, on the weather these days. I mean, look, I am very interested in the global south, or the developing world, or however you want to phrase it. But the idea that you can tell me that Bangladesh, which has been underwater for a long time, is because of climate change rather than because of underdevelopment, where, in fact, if they had built, or if they'd been allowed to, if they had the wealth to develop, and you didn't have fishermen living on terrible wooden shacks in the middle of the oncoming tides, and they had the infrastructure to be able to free themselves, to warn themselves of these problems, that wouldn't be a better thing. For me, development is better. You see, because Bangladesh is below sea level, so is Holland. Yet nobody dies in Holland when there's a sea level rise these days. In the 1950s they did. And that's because they've developed. And that's the one thing which we have to put back on the agenda. The one thing which is taken off the agenda for Extinction Rebellion is development, progress, growth. All these things which they put inverted commas around and see as a problem is, in fact, that they're denying the development of the third world to actually kind of move up to our living standards.
OK, let's move the debate on to how these protesters are going about their business at the moment. Sakina Sheikh, what do you make of the fact that they're planning to shut down Westminster for a fortnight? Do you think that's the right way to gain public support? They will disrupt a lot of Londoners who are trying to go about their business, and they'll take up a lot of police time.
I mean, I think the thing that's so brilliant about London is the diversity and the freedom of speech that gives protesters to be able to build such powerful messages. But we also have to remember that the fossil fuel industry, such as BP and Shell, they call London their home. They use London's reputation to be able to extract oil and gas around the world. But we also see that actually it is these industries that commit human rights abuses, like the killing of Ken Saro-Wiwa, a Nigerian dissenter, when he stood up to Shell for drilling oil in the Ogoni lands that was completely polluting the Niger Delta. So I think that actually London is exactly the city that we need to see this protest, this resistance, the heart of this resistance grow, and say that this is a fossil fuel industry, an industry that actually not only commits human rights abuses, but is burning our planet. We have less than 11 years before we do irreparable damage. It's about time we started taking action.
And Austin Williams, would you accept that the likes of Extinction Rebellion have been successful in getting their voices heard? The government has declared climate change a national emergency, not necessarily solely down to those protests, but they have indeed done that. They've set a carbon zero target for 2050. Again, the protesters want that brought forward, but they are making an impact.
Well, of course they're making an impact, but then again, Sky has been banging on about this for a hell of a long time. So has the BBC. I mean, you can't move for a conversation about the environment and why we're all destroying it and arguing that humanity is to blame. I'd rather turn it around and say that humanity is a solution rather than a problem, that more people is better than fewer people, and I think that development is better than no development. So I think that the argument that the Extinction Rebellion people are putting on the agenda, because, no, putting something on the agenda is one thing, yes, and having an impact and being seen is one thing. But what are they saying? And they're actually arguing for a very retrograde, reactionary style of politics. Even the conversation that your other speaker just brought up there about democracy and the wonders of London and how we can have so many kind of diverse opinions. Obviously, there are certain diverse opinions which aren't allowed in this conversation, like people who maybe argue that this is not an important issue. So, whereas, you know, the Occupy movement 10 years ago, 5 years ago, argued that 99% were being represented by the protesters, and now we have Extinction Rebellion be able to destabilize democracy and introduce a citizens' assembly, where we heard that before, citizens' assembly to bypass the awkwardness of democracy, which they think has failed us, the voting system has failed us, and they want to then bring in their own kind of ilk to try and have a conversation which excludes people who don't agree with them. This is not democracy. This is the opposite.
Well, Austin, I would argue that you're actually one of those diverse voices that doesn't think climate change is an issue. What we need is a commitment to net zero 2030, decarbonising our country.
Well, what you need, yeah.
OK,
so that
I'm going to have to wrap you both up, I'm afraid. But thanks very much. I'm sure this discussion will re-emerge in the weeks to come. But for the moment, Austin Williams and Sakina Sheikh, thanks both very much indeed.
Thank you.